Oh shit, that's the wrong button. I was trying to take the thumbnail selfie, but now I've hit record, but let's persevere. Hi guys, welcome to a video about how to follow up your flop check raises on the turn. Did you know that many of you are learning how to play one street and completely neglecting the future streets in a bigger pot that can actually ensue after you take a line like check raising the flop? If you mess up the turn, having check raised the flop, that can actually render a lot of your flop raises, like your bluffs for example, minus EV because you're butchering the hand later on in a bigger pot. Today we're going to learn when to follow through, when to give up, what kinds of hand you can bluff on the turn, where you need to be selective, where you don't need to be as selective because it's a good run out for your range. Lots of goodies like that. Before we get into the video, remember it's almost Black Friday. Our 25% off site-wide discount at Carrot Corner is about to go live. Make sure you click that top link in the description, head over to Carrot Corner, plan what you're going to purchase in the Black Friday weekend. We're only running that 25% off site-wide discount for a few days, so make sure that you don't miss out. Now let's get to the video and master turn play when your flop check raise gets called. Enjoy. This is Pile 3. Pile 3 learned poker in a poverty-stricken environment. In order to make ends meet, he had to get really good at GTO and extract a big win rate from the pool to feed his family. Pile 3 has since moved out of the slums, bought a mansion in LA, and is now one of the most successful poker players in the world, sometimes even frequenting Hustler Live on a Thursday evening to take advantage of the soft lineup when they let him in the game. Let's learn from Pile 3, also from his brother. This is Pile Trainer. Before taking up poker, Pile Trainer worked with Mike Tyson in the late 80s and early 90s, helping him become one of the greatest boxers of all time. Since then, Pile Trainer has been teaching GTO nerds how to think about poker and giving them red boxes saying EV loss when they lose the tiniest fraction of EV by taking a line that's microscopically worse than the other lines. But you've got to be a perfectionist if you want to make it in poker, and no one knows that better than Pile Trainer. But on a serious note, we're going to be using both the solver and the trainer today to drill this node. When we're looking at turn spots like this, it's really cool to recreate it visually because our silly human brains work with visual patterning the most. We tend to learn in that way, where when we've clicked the button on the screen while looking at the actual playing cards, we internalize it better than if we're just looking at a big grid and trying to take that to the tables. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of an overview on some of the main theory nuts and bolts for playing the turn after check raising the flop. And then we're going to go over to this hand with the pocket fours, figure out what to do, generate loads of spots like it, and become a beast at playing this kind of node. So let's get into it. So in the first example today, the flop is King, King 5. We're going to check over this kind of wide defense range from the big blind to the cutoff, who is going to bet 3 into a pot of 9. Major shout out to Ben Ababi, who you may know from his own YouTube channel and from this YouTube channel and lots of poker YouTube channel. The guy gets about the poker YouTube, what can you say? And he actually messaged me the other morning and he said, hey, Carrot Man, I noticed that you haven't been putting your bets into percent pot, so your viewers are really stupid, so they won't actually understand what's going on. No, he didn't actually say that. He said that you guys would understand better what was going on if I put it into percent pot. So that's what I'm doing for you guys. You can see that it's 3 chips in a 1-2 game that they're betting here into a pot of 9 chips, but they're also betting third pot, so we can now see that. We can also see our raises in percent pot, which is a pretty nifty thing. A lot of people don't understand how percent pot raising works. What you need to do to figure that out is you need to actually call villain's bet and then make it an amount of money extra to them that is a percentage of that new pot that you generate when you call. So when villain bets 3 into 9 on the flop, the pot becomes 12. If you call, the pot then becomes 15. So if you made it an extra 15 to villain, i.e. you made it 18 chips here, that would be a pot size raise. So when you make it 21 chips here, you're actually making it 120% pot. There are 2 sizes that we play about with in our course Weapons of War that we teach in the Carrot Poker School. We teach a small bet, we teach a much bigger raise as well. And today on King, King 5, we're going to be using the small one because we want to be raising pretty merged here. Check out Weapons of War episode 3, the Swords of Check Raising for more on that. But yeah, we're going to be raising not just King X in this spot. And if we do raise a king, it's not going to be the nuts. We're going to be losing to other kings. We're going to block the calling range. So this is not really the kind of board where you even want to raise the king big. But you also want to build a more mergy range here and raise some 9s and 8s and 7s. And the reason you want to do that is that these hands are generating both denial and value at the same time. And the more useful the fold equity you're getting, because you're denying equity to the opponent, the thinner you can go for value. That's a really good maxim. Whereas if you're just raising super thick for value and not getting much denial, you would want to go bigger and just raise more polarized is the idea. So here we're using a kind of only semi-polarized range. It's a bit of merginess. We're not really interested in going big. So we go for the small sizing with the range that's in the classic Pio raise color here. So let's say we do that, and then villain calls, and we go on to a turn. So if the turn is something bricky that doesn't really give us many draws, like the 8 of clubs, the first thing to note about this sort of situation is that this is not going to be particularly good for our range. Our range lands here with 45% equity, i.e. not very much. And in terms of EV, we are only entitled to 13.66 chips of a pot that is actually 31 chips by the time we've check raised and been called. That's lousy, and therefore standards apply. One of the maxims of the Carrot Poker School is called Crow's Theorem in grade 3, and that basically goes like this. If you raise a hand on the flop, and then you get to the turn and your hand is really, really bad, and the turn is bad for your range, then you cannot bet. And that might sound obvious, but people do hemorrhage a lot of EV in spots like this by making some misguided bets. So what does cannot bet mean? Well, what it means is that if you have absolutely nothing, then you should give up. But the thing is, there isn't really a whole lot of absolutely nothing in our range here, because even when we have a hand like Jack 10, for example, we are still going to have pair draws. Pair draws are very important. Pair draws are good, right? Because when villain calls our flop raise, they are not just going to have trips. It's not the case that we've caused him to filter his range and now he just has the nuts. People love to say this, like, he must have something really, really good because he called our check raise. It's like, no, that's not the case. Like, the ranges are super wide. Like, he literally bet his entire range on the flop. And then when you raised, he had to defend, like, ace queen offsuit at some frequency and was never allowed to fold pocket sixes. Okay, if your opponents are folding sixes here, you should just raise the flop with any two cards, but they're probably not unless you're playing like 5NL against a net or something like that. But maybe I'm overestimating the skill of a 25NL player continuing this flop. I don't know. But yeah, we get to the turn card here. Pick a bricky turn, 7 of clubs. Was that a different one to the one I just picked? Okay, it doesn't really matter because the pattern is that if your hand is really, really miserable, like you have queen 9 and the solver's like, okay, you're blocking the folding range because you're blocking a queen, so you're blocking ace queen and queen jack suited and stuff like that, then you can give up. But as soon as your pair draw is like queen 10 or queen jack or something, you're allowed to bet third pot. Now, it's very non-standard to bet third pot after you've check raised the flop and been called. It's only going to happen in situations where your value range is kind of mergy or it blocks a lot of villains continues or both. Like in this situation where you're raising a ton of trip kings. The trip kings of different kickers have different equities. They're all kind of medium to good but not nutted and they block the continuance range. So this is one of the rare situations where you do actually use a lot of small bets. Solver thinks on this turn that you can actually go giant when you have exactly pocket sevens and you can build a second sizing around that. But I want to start with this hand to show you that it is an exception, and usually you have to be a bit more careful than this about what you're betting because you're betting really, really big. And when you're betting big on the turn, having check raised the flop and being called, you're going to be way more selective than just some random pair draw like Jack 10 or Queen Jack offsuit or something like that. When you're looking through the sim, try not to get too bogged down on the exact suits and what's happening there. It's just not going to be important. You can see the solver likes to have that club in its hand because it unblocks the backdoor floaty hands like ace jack, ace queen, and queen jack that might be there from the flop that are now folding. But that's going to be a very small swing and it's not really the overarching theme that you're trying to learn when you're reviewing this spot. Rather, what you're trying to do is A, learn which value hands you can still bet with and what sizing they're going to be betting, and B, what bluffs to use in your range to sort of play a decent strategy and make sure you're bluffing sometimes. In this situation then, in theory, we go third pot again because it's a rare example where we actually have this bizarrely mergy kind of thin value, or at least not mega nutted King X region, and there's lots of different equities of that. And if we look at the equity of those hands, while it's quite good, it's not like 100%. And this is a rainbow board, so only having 84% with King 4 on a rainbow board means that you are losing. You are dead like 16% of the time or something like that. Let me show you a more conventional spot now where the turn strategy is a bit more normal and where you have to be a bit fussier with your bluffs, where like just a random pair draw isn't going to cut it. In this sim, villain has gone ahead and bet range again. Now, they might not do this on this board, but just for simplicity, I've kept it as a range bet just to compare. And here, we're actually using the big raise a lot because if you contrast this to the last time, we're not actually raising mediocre hands like trips here that block the calling range and are medium. we're actually raising very, very nutted stuff for value here, like Queen 9, Queen 4, Pocket 4s, and Pocket 9s, and maybe a little bit of the toppest pair of Ace Queen with the best kicker imaginable. So we go for the gigantic raise, which isn't as gigantic as it looks. If you think about this flop raise as 7x, then yes, it feels really, really big. But if you think about it as a B120, then it's only a slight overbet with a very polarized range, and that's not actually that ridiculous. Billing continues, you can see they're folding a lot more this time because you went absolutely colossal on the flop. And then we get another bricky turn. Let's say the turn is something like the Ace of Spades, which is probably not going to be a fantastic card for your range. We're entitled to 23 chips out of 51. In equity terms, we have only 47%. It's another one of these disadvantageous worlds for our range after we check raise the flop and get called. We are using the B75 strategy now. We're sizing up. We don't need to go for the overbet because the normal function of the overbet on the turn is to bring extra money into play that wouldn't be in play already. But of course, at this SPR, we can just bet the turn and jam the river and don't have to worry about going for some giant turn overbet. To facilitate that, contrast that to a probe situation where the pot's stagnated on the flop and the SPR is giant and you have to go huge to bring the extra money into play. Remember, guys, the function of the turn overbet is to bring that extra money into play. If it's not necessary, you don't need to do it. So here we're going to go B75. We have our value region, 9s, 4s, Queen 9, Queen 4. And these hands are mixing sometimes. They're not actually mandatory value bets. And the reason for that is that if you check, villain is encouraged to reopen pretty often because they have a big equity advantage now that you've checked. 58% equity, EV share 33 chips out of 51. Very, very good spot for them. They're meant to get a bit of denial here. They're meant to go for some thin value here. They're meant to reopen a lot. They're meant to bluff a lot. If you think your opponent's really placid, you probably don't want to check here on the Ace of Spades turn, and you just want to bet instead. But do know that out of position, in spots where your range is just giving up a lot, you are going to throw in those trap checks at quite a high frequency at equilibrium. So you're doing that with 9s, I don't know, what, 30% of the time? More than you would think. The next thing to say is that frequency doesn't really matter. You're not trying to mirror this, you're not trying to copy this, you're just trying to understand that these are theoretically optional. And then you can think exploitatively, is my opponent really stab happy? Are they really passive? Do I just want a value bet here? Are they stationary or are they like nitty but stabbing a lot? And that can lead you in the right direction with your value hands. When it comes to bluffing, there will be a very real sort of minimum standard being applied now to your bluffs. So if we take a hand that was like pretty bad on the flop, for example, a gutter like King 10 off, you can see that that hand never bets the turn. Basically what the solver is saying here is that this is an unfavorable landscape for you. You're not generating a ton of natural fold equity here, just a normal amount, and you're out of position. Therefore, there is a minimum standard about how much equity you need to bluff, and King Jack and King 10 are not cutting the mustard here, but Jack 10 off is. That's an example of a hand that's above your threshold for bluffing. This one is below. A random pair draw here would not suffice because the caliber of a pair draw on this node where you've raised giant on the flop and the aces come on the turn is awful. So if you had got here with some awful hand with no gutter, like if you had 10-8 here and it somehow didn't have a gut shot, because the rules of poker were changed and straights didn't exist, it would not be okay to bet with just a pair draw to a 10 or an 8. So that's just an example of like why you can't go ahead and do absolutely crazy looking shit on the turn. You don't get enough fold equity. There's a minimum standard. You've got to have a certain amount going on to bet. If you have a flush draw, it's an optional bet. You can do it. You don't have to. And then your value betting range is basically ace-x of hearts plus. Of course, if the turn wasn't an ace, these hands would also be able to bluff. And if you look at your bad flush draws, they can bet as well. So that's 9x. But if we look at like, what's a really awful flush draw here? The 8-6 of hearts or something like that. It's not a crime to give that hand up. Like you could just check fold here and you're not meant to bet it every time because you don't really have the value to support that, especially if you're checking your value sometimes. But 8-6 is like an optional turn bet here. So this is not a node where you like need to keep going because you raised the flop. I think the biggest leak here I see from students is that they just blast away every hand that they raised on the flop with because they think that they're telling a consistent story or they either have it or they don't or some nonsense thought process like this. But realistically, at the moment when you raise the flop, there are lots of turns that are still possible. They're a lot better for your range than the ace of spades. So if all your gutters had got there, or the turn was a heart, or something like that, your range would be doing a lot better. You can see on the heart turn, we play completely differently. Now our value range is mergy. Now our value hands at the top are blocking villains calling range. It's the same pattern as in the first hand. And now we're actually going for B33 here with hands like 2-pair, flushes, sets, assorted flushes as well, good flushes, bad flushes. It's now a range advantage spot. We actually have an equity edge. Our EV pot shares 30 chips out of 51. Range bet small on the turn pretty much. even the lowly king 10 offsuit with no heart is now going to be able to bet. King jack with no heart is probably good. Okay, not quite king jack with no heart, but most hands are able to bet on this node, and there's only certain ones that don't have the heart in them that are giving up at the very bottom, but almost everything is actually able to bluff 33% pot or value bet 33% pot. Note just how often you actually have it here as well. You just don't have that much air on this turn, so it doesn't really make sense to start bombing. Your range is mostly got there, or is a made hand of some kind. And if it's not, it's relatively high equity. When you've got a really high equity range, but not a giant nut advantage anymore, you just want to be betting small and frequently, the opposite to on the brick turn. So the 3 of hearts and the 3 of, let's say, diamonds are going to play completely chalk and cheese, like completely opposite. Here we just build the big bet. There is a tiny bit of overbet here, but it's really not necessary to build in. And here in the 3 of hearts, we just go for the almost range bet small. So memorizing that and learning why is going to be really important. Let's look at one more spot before we head on over to the trainer. Okay guys, so this time the flop is 8-6 deuce rainbow, and I've actually given villain the chance to check this time. I've not forced them into range betting, which is going to lower our raise frequency a little bit. This is another one of these boards though, where our raising range doesn't just want to be the nuts. A big mistake I see people make here on 8-6 deuce is that they only raise with 2 pair plus and bluffs, and they're basically giving their opponent free reign to range bet and just not face any aggression on these notes. So what you should do instead is understand that because a lot of your thin value raises here, they're gaining a lot of protection, they're getting a lot of useful fold equity. They don't need to be as thick for value as you might think. So if you do have a hand here like 8x, you can actually go on and raise that for value here. And you can even raise a bit of your 6x and stuff like that, especially with the low kicker that's more vulnerable. Again, the rule is the more vulnerable it is, the more useful the fold equity, the thinner it can be for value. So this works too. When you're bluffing this flop, you're going to find some bluffs like the Jack 9 backdoor. Note that this is a low board, and so your pair draws are going to be pretty good again, and therefore you're going to be able to raise without straight draws, without flush draws. It's kind of hard to have a flush draw on 8-6 deuce rainbow anyway, but yeah, you don't need to be too fussy there. Another big mistake I see people make on the flop is that they're just not raising enough with those pair draw and backdoor hands. I really love pair draws. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night just thinking about pair draws, and sometimes I talk about pair draws in my sleep, much to my wife's dismay. She's like, who is this pair draws woman you keep going on about? And I'm like, you wouldn't understand. It's part of Pile Solver. No, you know the guy whose brother trained Mike Tyson. And then she's like, just go back to sleep. So anyway, we get to this node and we raise and villain calls, and the turn is the Jack of Hearts. By the way, if you don't like my humor and it puts you off the videos, too bad. Too bad. You just have to listen to it anyway. I don't care. Most people like it, so you just have a shit sense of humor. Anyway, on the turn, you can see here that because we've gone for the lower sizing, the 53.3% pot flop raise, the 4x, the 3.5x, whatever it is, we're now overbetting. Overbetting is back in fashion on this Jack of Spades turn. And what's happening here is that pot growth is once again a priority, because we didn't actually build the pot that much on the flop with that smaller raise. Now we pull out. I hear live vloggers say that sometimes. So we're going to pull out in this spot. And it's like, yeah, okay, very good. But like, do you actually understand what's going on with your hand in a vacuum? And let's talk about that. There is a minimum standard here. As you can see, when we're overbetting, we need to be a bit fussier about what we continue to bluff with. And the biggest mistake you'll see here is people will take King 7 of diamonds. They'll try to tell the same story. They'll try to keep bluffing. They will go into a fight or flight tunnel vision mode where they're just thinking about whether they can make their opponent fold, and they forget about the minimum standard that actually ensues in a spot like this. That is bad for range because, again, we're entitled to 45% of the pot, and our pot share is about just under half the pot, 14.6 chips out of 31. So not a terrible spot for range, but not a good one either. And if you are building overbet, you're going to be way fussier about what you're bluffing. You're going to be giving up bottom of range in a spot where you're playing overbet check as your turn toolkit. You're going to be giving up Queen 5 of clubs. You're going to be giving up Queen 7 of diamonds. You're going to be giving up with all of these hands. King 9 of hearts, forget about it. You did not check raise the flop so that you could blast King 9 of hearts on the Jack of Spades turn. You check raise the flop because the turn might have been a 7 or a 10 or a 9 or a king, or villain might have folded. People forget that branching is a thing. Like back on the flop, there were all these good branches that were possible, and none of them happened for King 9 of hearts because you got a call, which is bad. You got the Jack of Spades turn, which is bad. Your hand is a piece of crap, which is bad. That might not have been the case. So sometimes you'll hear very misguided poker players say something like, what's the point of check raising King 9 of hearts on the flop if you're just going to give up on the Jack of Spades turn? And that thought process is absurd. that thought process is as absurd as leaving the house with a hat on that you like and then a big gust of wind coming and blowing your hat away and then saying, well, why would you wear the hat anyway if it's just going to get blown away, as if you were supposed to know that was going to happen. This is so absurd, guys. See if you catch yourself doing this, just stop it. Not only are you embarrassing yourself, but you're embarrassing me and the whole Carrot Corner community. And you don't deserve to play the game, so just stop it. Let's look at the trainer. Let's try to summarize what we've just talked about. On mergy kind of turns where you have a lot of flushes and trips of different kickers and you're blocking villain's calling range, you're going to use a small bet. On brickish turns where you're just going to continue value betting really thickly, you're going to use an overbet if necessary, or a B75 if the pot doesn't require building. And the bigger you go, the fussier you're going to be. The wetter the board, the less good your pair draws are. The bigger you go, the less you can bet solely with just pair draws, the more you need to have flush draws and stuff like that. You should definitely give up the bottom of your range when you're playing overbet check. It would be a huge punt to bet here with the Queen 7 of clubs. I hope I've covered pretty much everything that's going to keep you out of trouble here. Let's hone our skills in Pile Trainer. Okay, so at the start of the video, I showed you this pocket forest hand. This is, of course, a bricky turn. This is the spot where we're going to be using big bet or check if we've used the big flop raise, and over bet or check if we've used the small flop raise. Because we've used the giant 7x flop raise here, I'm just going to be big betting. With fours, I am allowed to check raise, remember, because my opponent is going to go ahead and actually reopen the action sometimes and blah, blah, blah. And so I can either check or big bet here. Let's big bet this time. So you can see that it's okay to do that with fours and it's okay to use that sizing. So that's totally fine. What you can actually do as well is you can press the control button followed by the O key at the same time. I know it's difficult for you boomers to press two keys at the same time, but you do have to learn how to do that sometimes in life. And you know, you can bring up the sim here and you can see that fours is indeed a mix of check and big bet for the reasons that we have spoken about already. Let's do another spot. Okay, so we're going to click deal a new hand here. And we actually have the same board. This should have different boards in it. I don't think it just has this one. I think it has all the ones we looked at today. Anyway, we have raised on the flop here. Again, we've gone for the small raise this time. The thing I don't like about Pile 2 Trainer is that it doesn't actually give you the most frequent line most frequently. Like on the flop, we saw that we don't really use the small raise size much here, but it's kind of making us play the turn having raised small. I could have just specified that we'd raise big though in the inputs to this and I didn't. Anyway, we have the more mergy range here. This is going to be a weird spot, and we land on the ace of diamonds turn. Just as a side point, when you use GTO Wizard, this happens a lot as well, where like you plug in a sizing, that sizing barely exists in the game tree, and it gives you like a tiny range node where like some really small, weird sub-range use the sizing at a low frequency, and it's kind of a garbage output a lot of the time. So that's one criticism I have about GTO Wizard compared to just setting up your own drills. I could have set this up so it wasn't giving me this raise 11 on this board, right? I just didn't. As played, we need to decide what our turn strategy is. We're probably back in overbet node here. Honestly, we're probably using the really big bet. I don't know why it's not showing the percentage of that, but it's like a B150 or something. And I think on the turn with this hand, we're probably checking, would be my guess if we're just going big bet or check. So let's check with the hand. And it says check is okay. And villain has bet third pot, so we're going to call. It says call is okay. And that's the end because we're only looking at one street. Let's bring up the solver here and just verify that we knew what was going on. So we go to the turn here. We are playing big bet or check. Okay, so it's actually not using overbet on the ace turn. Bit of an anomaly there, but okay. And we are going to be checking. Sometimes with this hand, because we're using the big bet, not the overbet, we can actually bet here. I guess I underestimated the value of this hand. I thought it was a little bit more marginal than it is, but it's actually fine here to go ahead and bet the top pair. And even some second pair is betting here. I'm just kind of underestimating how many draws and, you know, just Queen X, 9X and stuff get here. It's a really wide range spot where villains range bet the flop. So yeah, we can go for value a little bit thinner than I expected there, which makes a lot of sense. So when I do these exercises for you guys, I actually learn, I teach myself, I calibrate my thresholds and stuff as I'm going through it, which is really just infinitely useful. Okay, I pressed deal a new hand and it did give us the King 5 board this time. We have check raise small on the flop, which as you'll recall is the only sizing we're using on King 5. This is a board where we're raising a more mergy range. We're raising a lot of pocket pairs, some 5x and all kinds of assorted kings that block calling range. And so again, we are not going for the giant raise on King 5. For more on this, do check out Weapons of War episode 3. and we decide to block the turn a lot with this sort of combo. And the reason we're blocking a lot here is that, again, we just have a way more mergy value region, and even though we're mainly just going to be betting hands like King X for value and the odd pocket pair maybe, those hands block calls and they're not super thick, right? They're not like really, really thick value hands, so we're just going to be doing that. Let's speed up a bit, just go through a few more spots. Aha! Classic Crow's Rule from Carrot Poker School Grade 3. We raise the flop, we have utter trash. The turn comes a card that we'll be playing overbet or check on. We are checking the 7-5. As you can see, we're playing flawlessly. We're basically never making any mistakes because we are being trained by the same solver that trained Mike Tyson in the late 80s. So it's not really any surprise, right? I'll stop making that joke now. Those of you who didn't find it funny the first time are probably getting annoyed right now. The guys that did find it funny the first time are like, yeah, it's less funny now that you keep doing it. We get the 5 turn here, having raised ace 7. This is a hard one to find on flop, guys. You look at ace high and you're like, ace high is a medium strength hand. And you know, you're not wrong, but it's kind of medium low and it has some nutted redraw and it does get some better hands to fold. And I can see why it's a raise, but I'd probably miss this one myself, quite honestly. On the turn though, this is what we call good card for range, right? We haven't looked at this yet, apart from the flush iteration. This is the straight iteration. This is the sort of more B75-y spot where we're going to be betting big on the turn frequently, maybe even some overbet. And I think our hand can bet here very happily if it wants to. I think we're getting folds from some better hands. I think we have a lot of equity. I think the main line here is probably just going to be to bet big. And is doing that most of the time with this hand with a little bit of overbet, as we predicted, because we're basically just perfect poker players, you know. And so yeah, that's the sort of spot where you can be a bit less fussy. And you're going to have a very high bet frequency with most hands in your range because your range loves that 5 turn. Okay, King, King, 5-4, we're back to block or check. This is the one type of hand I don't mind building a really big bet with, but, you know, let's be tricky trappy and throw in a check this time just to show you that it's okay, to reinforce that you are allowed to slow play that hand in that spot. Speeding up towards the end of the video as we solidify what we've learned today. Pocket 7s on this node, we are going to be checking. Because it's basically middle of range, it's not okay to bet this hand. Oh, wait, it is okay to bet this hand. Stupid Pete. We are allowed to bet 7s because what it lacks in equity and thick value, it makes up for in useful fold equity. Your opponent's folding some queen jack suited, queen 10 suited, ace queen, hands like that, and you're only going small. So it does make sense that this is a bit of a hybrid hand. Maybe they even like fold 9s sometimes or something. I'm curious. Do they like fold a better hand at any frequency? Or is this just like thin value protection? Let's have a look in the solver. So we block bet with 7s here, which is kind of an anomaly, right? Because 10s, 9s, 6s, 4s, and 3s barely do that. It's really just 7s is in that sweet spot between getting a bit of value and being really vulnerable. And they don't fold any better hands. So it really is just a mix of like surviving-ish when called and getting really useful fold equity. That's what's going on there. Sometimes I can figure out what's going on in a sim way, way better than I can actually play poker. And I was talking to Ben at Badbeat about this a while back, where I was saying I'm so much more comfortable like understanding a sim, explaining it, coaching, that kind of thing, than I am like figuring out that 7s can bet there at the table. I need like a bit of time to figure that out, whereas he's more of like a battle-hardened grinder warrior, and he's more likely to figure that out at the table. So, you know, different folks, different strokes, you know, full-time coaches, content creators, and full-time players are going to have different skill sets, which is an important thing to remember. I don't know why I'm even talking about this. It was just kind of fresh in my head. Okay, final hand for today then. We have the 5-4 offsuit in the big blind. We've raised the flop. The 10 of hearts turn has come, and we have a single gut shot, not a double gutter. It looked like it might be. The question is, what strategy are we playing here? And I think the answer is quite obviously that we're going for bigger bets and checks mostly because we're just very polar. I think we can play overbet here probably, although the SPR is a bit lower because we use the big flop raise, so maybe B75 will suffice. I think this hand has enough going on that it can bet here. Sometimes people get a bit fussy and they actually want to have a flush draw and stuff, but gutter's going to be fine on this node. Not using the overbet here because we went for the bigger flop raise, I guess. And yeah, just building with B75. That's enough, you know. Nutshot, as you call it. Was it Clanty? They used to say nutshot. I don't really like that term. It feels a bit weird to me, but let's go with it. The nutshot is generally able to bet because what it lacks in quantity of outs, it makes up in quality of outs. And the node where the 3 comes in the river is so valuable to you that you can bet this hand on the turn. It has enough going on, even in one of these spots where you need to be selective. A hand that wouldn't have enough going on would be like the Jack 7 of diamonds. That would have to give up if it did raise the flop, or the Jack 5 of diamonds, or something like that would be a clear give up here. Well, guys, I guess that takes us to the end of this video. I hope this has clarified how to play the turn, having check raise the flop. If you like the way I teach the game, I have lots of premium courses for you on Carrot Corner. It is the Black Friday sale. We are going to have the golden carrot product, which is the Carrot Poker School, cash injection, weapons of war, permanent lifelong access, unless I like die or something, to the subscriber library at carrotcorner.com. Sign up there for Black Friday and get 25% off all of that if it's time for you to start your formal Carrot Poker education. Then top link in the description. I'll be back with more content very soon. Let me know what you think of this one. I can make more videos like this if you like it, although not too many, because it's probably like too good value to give you guys for free. Is it? Let me know in the comments what you think about that, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.